Hello and welcome to Business Connections, a program of the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm Holly Allen, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for being with us today. Today we're talking about a topic that you have not been able to avoid if you live in the state of Ohio, and that is marijuana, which has become known as Issue 3. And today we are talking about that topic with Chris Kershner, Vice President of Public Policy and Economic Development with the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce, and Helen Jones-Kelley, Executive Director of Montgomery County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services. Thank you both for being with us today. This is a topic that runs the gamut of issues. It's a very large topic for the state of Ohio, and I want to start with you, Chris, to give us an idea of Issue 3 and what this entails as far as the legislative language and what it would mean for the state of Ohio.
Sure. Thanks, Holly. Issue 3 simply will put a monopoly into the state constitution for 10 organizations to have the recreational and medicinal sale of marijuana in the state of Ohio. It also will allow usage of marijuana for those 21 years or older. It will authorize edible marijuana products as well as oil-based products, as well as your traditional, what everybody's known as the traditional marijuana, which is the smoking form. Mm-hmm. So it's gonna legalize, if passed, all gamuts of marijuana by putting an amendment into the state constitution. What's a little bit different on this than you've seen in some other states is it is limiting it to just 10 companies that will have the sole rights for the manufacturing, cultivation, and production of the marijuana in the state of Ohio. So individual marijuana entrepreneurs that are maybe trying to come up with their own strains or trying to come up with innovative new ways to develop the product won't have that ability because the exclusive rights are going to be put in the Constitution for just those 10 companies.
And this is not anything we've seen states do previously, that putting this in the Constitution, this monopoly part of the piece. From a public policy point of view, what are your concerns with the idea of putting these named landowners in the state constitution?
Yeah, this was done one other time in the state of Ohio that in the most recent history, and it was done with the Ohio Casino Amendment. That was done that authorized 5 casinos, I believe it is, across the state, and 2 owners and developers. That was something the Chamber was opposed to at that time. It's not because we were against the casinos coming into Ohio, but it was because we didn't think the right way to govern your state was to put into the Constitution an amendment that limited it to just 2 owners, basically eliminating a competitive bidding process and eliminating really the free market enterprise that our country was founded on. So that principle and that foundational principle of the Chamber still remains constant today. And that is really one of the things that's driving the Chamber's opposition to Issue 3 is the fact that this is putting a monopoly in the state constitution. It's eliminating free enterprise and fair market opportunities in the state, and we don't think that's right, and neither do our members. And they came out really strong with that opinion, and we're reflecting their views in our opposition. Secondly, we're really concerned about the business impact that legalizing marijuana could have. Employers already have a hard enough time finding the right employees here in the Dayton area. We have employers all the time that are contacting us with workforce challenges. And a lot of times it's because they can't find folks to pass initial drug screening tests for entry-level positions at some of their organizations. Well, if greater access exists to a substance that impairs folks, it's only going to make that challenge worse. And we already have workforce challenges as it's related to drugs. If we increase access to an intoxicating substance, those challenges are only going to increase. Not to mention the increased hiring cost, increased drug screening cost, legal liabilities that employers are going to face. I mean, really, they have some serious concerns about how this is going to come into their workplace and affect their workplace. In Colorado, there's been companies that have already left Colorado because the impact was so great on their company that they had to look at alternative measures, and those alternative measures were moving out of state. The last thing we want to do as Ohio's on the upswing, we're seeing positive economic gains, last thing we want to do is discourage companies from being here and even giving them a reason to leave the state of Ohio. We need to be doing everything we can to make this the best environment for companies to grow and thrive. And legalizing marijuana is going to be one of those things that works against that positive business environment that we're all striving hard to do.
Helen, you hear Chris talking about the workforce issues from the business point of view. At ADAMAS, you deal with addiction day in and day out.
Right.
This is what you do. Can you talk about your concerns and how this might affect our community, not just the workforce, but everyone within the community?
Well, you know, in listening to Chris, I mean, it's just kind of a follow-on to several of the things he was saying, just in terms of having that impact on people. We're looking at this from a brain health perspective and thinking about not just in potential employees who may have to face addiction problems and then come into the system, of course, for treatment. So it puts a lot of additional costs on a system that it's already struggling to deal with. Casino and problem gambling and some of the things that we've put into our state in the last few years. People hear revenue, but they don't think about the other side of that coin, which is the impact on people who have a tendency to become addicted and to end up losing housing, employment, families. That social impact is great here in Ohio already with what we've already brought into the state and then what we've seen in the other states that have gone through this legalization process. The other concern we have, of course, from a public health and safety perspective is children. And we're looking at the marketing of this legalization process, and it's being marketed to kids because the thinking, much like when cigarettes were being introduced into the country in a major way, the thinking was, let's create a pipeline. Let's get people attached to the product early. Then we've built our own pipeline of consumers for the next how many years. That was a huge issue for this country. We've just gotten to a point now where people understand the health impact of cigarette smoking and all of the major costs to our own health system as a result of that. And now we're looking at bringing in marijuana. Imagine now again having to go back through the explanation about lung cancer and all of the other health issues that arise as a result of that. And think about children who are being marketed to, coming into this pipeline, having access to cannabis-infused products, candies, because we see a lot of products that just look like candies, gummy bears, cookies. If people have those available in the house, I know the legislation says not to be available to kids, but that's not what happens. Children got access to cigarettes, children got access to alcohol. How do you responsibly keep children from getting access to marijuana-infused products, particularly when we see the marketing going right after them to start with?
Right, and we've seen organizations such as Dayton Children's, they're taking a position against this issue. And you mentioned, you know, the gummy bears and the cookies. We have seen and we've heard that the concentration of the drug within those edibles is much higher than if you were to smoke marijuana. Have you seen any sort of numbers on the amount of THC in? We
have indeed. We've seen the numbers out of Colorado. And so people think, oh, it's no big deal. You know, you've even got people say, oh, I smoked back when I was in college back in the 60s and 70s. It's no big deal. It is a huge deal. The THC content then is nothing like what we're seeing out of Colorado right now. We're talking about anywhere from 10 to 40 times the level of THC in that, and then that's the
a shocking number.
Additive that gets people high. It is a shocking number because it can be debilitating, especially based upon people's physiology. So you think of youngsters, 14, 15-year-old kids getting that kind of chemical into their systems. It's no surprise that the admission rates at the emergency rooms in Colorado shot up as a result of legalization.
ADAMAS has been a leader in the community trying to educate people within our community. You held a forum earlier in September. The Chamber stepped forward early on and formed the DREAM Coalition, Dayton Regional Employers Against Marijuana. Chris, can you talk about why the Chamber took that step forward and then ADAMAS immediately jumped on board with the coalition? What was the impetus to start that coalition?
Sure, thanks, Holly. we had a lot of members that were coming to us early on who didn't want to see this legislation moving forward, this constitutional amendment moving forward, and they were looking for an organized venue in town, an organized group of folks that could come together and really work together to try to defeat this amendment. And they came to the chamber and said, this is a natural role for you guys as a public policy advocate on behalf of the business community. We saw the void and we jumped in and said, you know what, we're going to do what we have to do to make sure that the public is fairly educated about some of the issues related to marijuana legalization. The proponents, Responsible Ohio, the ones that sponsoring the Issue 3 amendment, they came right out the gate with a $20 million check from those 10 investors. Those 10 investors put $20 million in the pot to get this amendment passed. We didn't have $20 million. So, we're doing a grassroots educational campaign here in which we're reaching out to folks to try to make sure they can make the right decision on November 3rd. Without having $20 million, though, we have to do a lot of innovative and creative things to try to get the word out. And the Dream Coalition is one of them. We're able to get like-minded businesses and organizations and elected officials to come together to say, yeah, we're committed to defeating this issue, and we're going to partner together to educate our colleagues, our friends, our employees, and other folks that we work with on a regular basis as to the negative ramifications of Issue 3. So it's been a great effort. It's been off and running. The Dream Coalition has been very strong and has been growing ever since we launched it in late July. To tack on to one thing that Helen was talking about, the marketing to youth. One of the things that's really just been deplorable with the campaign from Responsible Ohio is the fact that they have been going after that youth, that youth, not really vote, but targeting their marketing at youth.
Right.
They even launched a mascot, superhero-looking mascot, big marijuana bud head, cape, fake muscles. It's funny. It's funny if you look at it. If my kids looked at him, they'd think he's a hero. Big Tobacco did this years ago. They were fined millions of dollars for it. Because just like Helen said, they were trying to start that pipeline at a young age. The supporters of this amendment say they're just using it to market on college campuses. Well, guess what? College campuses don't just have kids that are 21 years and older on those campuses.
Right.
They have kids that are 17 years old, 18 years old, 19 years old. And the marketing is not stopping there. The marketing is going even younger than that because they know from a business sense that if they can get folks thinking marijuana is not a big deal at a young age, those are their future consumers when they do become of age. And that really is just something that we think is shameful by this campaign. It's one thing to run a good ethical campaign. It's another thing to reach out and try to market to youth with something that could be very dangerous to their health.
Did you want to add anything to that, Helen?
No, he's absolutely right. Because one of the other issues that we saw in Colorado was that, and people quickly say it's not a gateway drug, but it is. And the younger a person begins to use it, the more likely they are then to use other drugs, and they go on to other levels of addiction. So in Colorado, you've got 13, 14-year-old children with access to marijuana who are now experiencing addiction to alcohol and heroin, cocaine, other drugs, because they keep continuing to go after that next level of high because their bodies build up tolerance. And now they even have the issue of youngsters who are expelled from school because they have this addiction issue, and they're either not going to school or they're not performing, and they're doing things to get access to drugs, maybe stealing, doing whatever kinds of things they can do to get the money to get more drug, and they're out of school permanently. So then that creates another social ill that we simply have not even talked about at all. And the fact that it takes such a negative impact on the trajectory on their lives, it's significant, and it's something that we need to be thinking about, particularly as we think about the way they're marketing to young people with this product.
Absolutely. I think we've heard from other children's hospitals as well that they've had issues with overdoses from the edibles and children getting a hold of those. So that's another concern. These are all issues that maybe you don't think about when you hear the advertisements on television or elsewhere. Chris, I did want to get back to, we talked a little bit about the monopoly part of this, but just in case, voters might be confused because there's Issue 3 on the ballot coming up in November, but there's also another issue, Issue 2, that has kind of sparked up because of this conversation about this particular amendment. Can you talk about what issue 2 is?
Sure, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because I can't see how it would be confusing for some folks. So issue 3 is the marijuana legalization. It puts the monopoly into the Constitution for recreational and medicinal use of marijuana in the state of Ohio. Issue 2 really came out of the fact that this amendment got proposed, that the casino amendment passed, and there's been other amendments that have been considered that would put a monopoly into our state constitution. And folks in the legislature, Republicans and Democrats together, came together and said, you know what, our Constitution should not be a political football that advances profiting schemes for 10 individuals like is proposed in State Issue 3. We need to do something that honors the democratic system that we're in, but at the same time makes it a little harder for these interest groups to try to put a monopoly into our state constitution. So issue 2, in the most simplest terms, will create another step in the process for interest groups or political parties if they're trying to put a monopoly in the state constitution. They will first have to seek voter approval, allowing that monopoly to be written into their constitutional amendment. If voters approve that and say, yes, we're going to allow you to write a monopoly in your constitutional amendment, then they can go forth with putting that in their constitutional amendment and then put that issue in front of voters to decide if they want to vote on it or not. It's just going to make the process a little more difficult, and it's going to provide more of a checks and balances system so that it's just not as easy to use our Constitution for political gain. So it's really a good government, a good policy that needs to be in place in the state of Ohio. And like I said, it is really supported across the board. I don't know anybody, maybe besides the responsible Ohio folks, that probably don't support issue 2 because it's really what's needed in the state to ensure the integrity of our democratic process and the integrity of our Constitution going forward. So we're asking, the Chamber and the Dream Coalition are asking that folks vote yes on issue 2, that they support the issue 2 amendment that will make it harder for monopolies like this to be put into constitutional amendments in the future. And then we're asking the voters to vote no on issue 3, the marijuana monopoly. We really think that is the wrong way to go.
So to put things into perspective, as far as how important the Constitution is, our state Constitution, and if an issue makes it into the Constitution, what would the voters need to do then to amend, to change anything that goes into our state constitution, whether it be this particular amendment or not?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Let's talk a little bit about the due process and what needs to happen to change the state constitution. Changing a constitution, whether it's the United States Constitution or the state constitution, is a very hard process, and it should be hard. The Constitution is set up for the framework of overall government for the state. The Ohio Constitution grants inalienable rights to freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, prohibits slavery. I mean, what we consider core rights and principles of our government and of our state. And now we want to put legalizing marijuana into that same constitution? I mean, it doesn't go hand in hand with some of those other basic freedoms that I just talked about. But to do that, it's a hard process, and it should be a hard process. You have to, there's 2 ways that an amendment can be put on the ballot, either through the General Assembly, if 132 members of the General Assembly, the majority of those 132 members decide to pass a resolution to put an amendment on the ballot, they can do that, which has happened with State Issue 2, the anti-monopoly amendment. Or you can gather signatures from the voters, from citizens in the state of Ohio, and put an amendment on the ballot. And that's what's happened with Issue 3. So they had to gather at least 305,000 signatures of registered voters, and they did that, and they were able to get Issue 3 put on the ballot. If you ever, and say Issue 3 was to pass, or if there ever wants to be a change to the Constitution in the future, you have to go through one of those 2 processes. So it's very difficult. You can't just amend it in the state legislature like you would if this was put into statute. If our state legislature was to pass a bill, they can amend that bill in the future as the economic needs of the state change or as the culture of the state changes. They can ebb and flow with that changing environment. When it's put into the Constitution, you can't ebb and flow. You have to go back to the people again. And when you go back to the people, that's a very good thing. I support the democratic process that we have, but there's a lot of education that has to go on. And you have to spend millions and millions of dollars to educate the public on that. And that's not a good use of everybody's hard-earned resources because somebody at one time chose to put an inappropriate amendment in the state constitution, and now we have to go back and spend millions of dollars to educate people when we want to change that. A great example is the casino amendment. So the casino amendment passed, and in there it said here are going to be the 5 locations of the casinos across the state. City of Columbus decided they wanted to move their casino to a different geographic location. There had to be another statewide constitutional amendment that was put on the ballot for everybody in the entire state to vote for Columbus to move their casino a few miles down the street. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's not what the Constitution's there for, but because it was put into the Constitution initially, that was the only way to change it. The only other way to change the Constitution is through an organization called the Constitutional Modernization Commission, which is a group of officials that meets, I think it's once every 10 or 20 years, and they have the ability to change the Constitution, but they are very conservative in their—
Understandably.
Yeah, absolutely, in their willingness to change that because the Constitution's been made up of votes of the people in the past, and they don't want to just come in and clean house on some things. So that is usually not the right venue to make changes. Going back to votes of the people is the right way to make changes, and that's a very difficult process.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank you both for being with us. Is there anything you wanted to add as we wrap up?
Just one very quick thing, just in relation to what Chris was sharing. Think about that constitutional amendment in terms of someone's health and safety, and the impact then of making a decision to put this issue into a constitutional amendment that is not something that's been approved by the FDA. We can't guarantee health and safety of our citizens through a constitutional vote on a health measure. This is something that needs to be evidence-based and needs to be approved at the federal level so that purity, consistency, and the health and well-being of the citizens of the state come first. And that should not be a voter initiative. That's something that really resides in a different venue within the state of Ohio, and that's part of the issue too. This shouldn't be something that's decided by voters. It's something that needs to be documented and approved by the medical profession at a federal level so that we have some checks and balances there as well.
It's a very good point. I'm glad you added that. Well, thank you both for being with us, Chris Kershner and Helen Jones-Kelley with ADAMAS and the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. This is an important issue. We'll be hearing a lot more about it. And we mentioned the Dream Coalition. If you want to get some more information about what the Dream Coalition is doing, you can go to dreamdayton.com. That is updated with the members of the Dream Coalition, which Chris mentioned continues to grow as we head toward November 3rd. Thank you so much for being with us.
Our chamber has taken a very active and public position on the upcoming November ballot issue on marijuana. Our board was clear that allowing a self-serving monopoly, oligopoly, or cartel to control the production, distribution, and marketing of any product is serious, dangerous, and just really bad public policy. These 10 growers expect to buy their way into our Constitution, and they're mistaken if they think they can buy Ohioans' votes in order to make millions or billions on the sale of this drug to our citizens. Employers have stated that there are too many workplace issues that affect the hiring and retention of a drug-free workforce, the safety of the public and their workers, and the liability associated with workers performing their jobs while under the influence. Law enforcement and our ADAMAS boards have denounced Issue 3 as marijuana being a gateway drug. We support Issue 2, an effort to stop future monopolies of any products, whether it be airlines, gasoline service stations, hotels, pharmacies, or the distribution of a gateway drug like marijuana. We hope Ohio voters will take the time to study these upcoming issues and see how important they might be for the future of Ohio. Go to www.dreamdayton.com for more information on these issues. We ask you to vote yes on Issue 2 and vote a resounding no on Issue 3 and let this marijuana cartel move to another, more gullible state.